There's a curious fact about human beings. We fight, we debate, we argue, but rarely over the definition of fairness itself. When someone cheats us, we don't shrug and say, well, that's just your way. No, we say, that's not fair. And whether it's in a playground in Karachi, a courtroom in London, or a rice field in Vietnam, the cry is strikingly familiar. Why do we all seem to know, deep down, that some things are right and others are wrong? It's strange, isn't it? Even before we are taught the rules of society, there's an innate protest that rises when someone violates what feels like justice. Not merely my justice or your justice, but justice as if it exists independently. You might excuse your own wrong behavior 100 ways, but you still demand accountability from others. And when they fall short, you don't argue based on preference. You argue based on a standard. But where did this standard come from? If someone cuts in line, you don't say, I dislike what you did. You say, you shouldn't have done that. That's moral language that implies they ought to have known better, and that ought is crucial. It means there's a law you believe they are subject to not because you made it up, but because it already exists. If morality were just personal or cultural instinct, then arguing about it would be like arguing over flavors of ice cream. There'd be nothing to appeal to just preferences, but people argue because they believe some things are universally true. If right and wrong were only traditions, then we could never call slavery wrong or genocide evil in any absolute sense. But we do, with passion, with certainty. Now some say that moral behavior is just instinct, that we help others or feel guilty simply because it's part of our survival programming. But instinct doesn't explain why we feel torn between doing what benefits us and what is difficult but right. Think of a time you had the chance to speak the truth, even though it cost you, or to admit your mistake instead of blaming someone else. There was a moment, wasn't there, when you knew what was right and still hesitated to do it. That's not instinct battling instinct. That's you confronting something higher than instinct, something commanding. This inner law isn't a matter of mood or moodiness. It doesn't go away when it's inconvenient. It has a haunting persistence. We know what it asks of us, and when we disobey, even in secret, it punishes us from within. You felt it, after the lie, after the betrayal, after the cowardice. You carry a discomfort, an unrest. That's not society punishing you. That's you convicting yourself. Now let's ask a deeper question. If this law exists, is it something we invented? Well, we invent traffic rules, but we can change them. We discover natural laws, like gravity, and they hold whether we agree with them or not. Morality feels more like the second kind. Civilizations may differ in how they express right and wrong, but the idea that courage is better than cowardice, that love is better than hate, and that truth is nobler than lies, those values have survived every era and culture. We didn't create them, we recognized them, and yet recognizing them doesn't mean we follow them. That's the real struggle. We fail every day. We want to be selfless, but we choose pride. We want to be kind, but we yield to anger. That failure is not just moral, it's deeply human, and that battle between what we are and what we know we should be is a clue that the law is not ours, but that we were made to live by it. So what does this all point to? If there is a law above us, then perhaps there is also a lawgiver, not a cold judge, but a mind behind the moral order, one who placed this compass within us, not to control us, but to guide us, not to accuse us endlessly, but to call us back to our better selves. Our sense of right and wrong isn't just a human invention. It is a whisper from something greater than us, inviting us to live not only as people who survive, but as people who matter. You've heard it before, that's not fair, in the mouths of children who have barely learned to speak in full sentences. A toddler pushed by another in a playground doesn't need a philosophy degree to cry out for justice. It happens spontaneously without being taught. That's not because someone gave them a textbook on ethics. It's because somewhere deep in the human framework, there's an understanding, a silent expectation, that people should behave rightly. Even in war-torn societies, even in the most primitive of tribes, there are moral expectations. You may find people disagreeing about how many wives a man can have or how property should be divided, but you won't find a culture that praises betrayal, rewards cowardice, or celebrates lying as a virtue. Why? Because despite the outward differences in customs, the foundational values echo one another. This suggests something deeper than custom, something unspoken but understood. If morality were only a cultural invention, then it would be as flexible as fashion. Yet history has shown that when injustice rises, true injustice, it stirs outrage across all borders. When a powerful crushes the weak, when the innocent suffer for the gain of the guilty, when truth is silenced by lies, something rises in us. Not just emotion, conviction, a sense that this is wrong, regardless of location or culture. That is the unspoken standard, a law not written by men, yet somehow known by all. We feel it not just when wrong is done to us, but when we witness wrong done to others. A stranger being humiliated, a worker being cheated, a child being abused. We recoil, even when we have no personal stake. Why would that happen? Unless there was something in us that recognizes a code beyond our immediate interest. And what's even more telling, we apply that same code to ourselves. At least we try. When we fall short of what we know is right, there's a discomfort we cannot easily dismiss. That's because the standard is not only something we use to measure others, it's something that measures us. We are haunted by it. It doesn't shout, but it whispers loud enough to disturb our sleep. Now look at your own life. Have you ever done something you knew was wrong, even though no one was watching, and later did you feel guilt, not because someone punished you, but because you felt off inside? That's the echo of the unspoken standard. That is not social fear or religious guilt. It is the moral thread running through the conscience, tugging even when the world is silent. This standard doesn't feel like something we chose. We may try to ignore it, we may even deny it intellectually, but we live by it instinctively. We expect people to be honest with us, to treat us fairly, to keep their promises. And when they don't, we don't say, well, everyone defines right and wrong their own way. We say, they shouldn't have done that. That word shouldn't only makes sense if we believe in a standard they were supposed to follow. What complicates the picture is that we are selective. We hold others accountable more than we hold ourselves. But even our hypocrisy confirms the truth of the standard. If right and wrong were merely about convenience or preference, there would be no hypocrisy, only choices. But the fact that we feel the need to justify our wrong actions shows that we know they're wrong. That standard is so deeply rooted in us, we cannot escape its shadow, even when we pretend to walk in a different direction. You see, we are not neutral beings building morality from scratch. We are more like people trying to interpret an ancient melody that keeps playing in the background of human existence. Some may play it well, others ignore it, but no one composed it individually. It's older than our upbringing, older than our laws, older than our ancestors. And yes, different cultures have developed different moral expressions, but even that proves the rule. Cultures don't invent morality, they interpret it. Just as all languages are attempts to describe the same world, all moral systems are attempts to describe the same truth. When one society says, "Do not steal," and another says, "Share all property," they may differ in method, but both are aiming at fairness. They are appealing to the same silent song. That is the unspoken standard we spoke of in the first speech. It's not written on walls, but it's etched in our humanity. It calls out when injustice occurs. It nags when we excuse ourselves too easily, and it urges us, whether we admit it or not, to ask a more unsettling question. If such a standard exists, who or what put it there? We left off with the idea that a silent standard of morality exists, one that doesn't have to be taught, but is universally sensed. Now, let's take that further. If this standard is real, then one of the clearest signs of its presence is found not in textbooks or laws, but in our arguments. Whenever two people quarrel, they do more than express anger or defend opinions. They make appeals. They say things like, "That's not fair," or "You promised," or "You shouldn't have done that." These are not just emotional outbursts. They are moral accusations, and they're revealing. Think about it. You don't argue with someone who doesn't share your basic assumptions. You wouldn't argue with a table. You only argue if you believe the other person should know better. That word, should, is the heart of it. It suggests you expect them to acknowledge a rule they didn't invent, a rule neither of you claim to own, a rule that both of you assume is already there. Even in heated arguments, most people don't say, "There is no right or wrong here. We're both just doing what we feel." Instead, they try to prove they are right, and the other person is wrong. That shows both parties believe in a common ground, even if they disagree on how it applies. The argument only makes sense if they both assume there is a right answer, and when people are caught doing something wrong, what do they usually do? Do they celebrate it? No, they make excuses. "I was tired. I didn't mean it. I had no choice." Why do they explain? Because they know they violated a standard, and they still want to be seen as decent. Their very defense is proof they believe in a rule they ought to obey. This is important, because if morality were just preference, like taste in music or food, then moral disagreements would be meaningless. You don't argue over whether chocolate tastes better than vanilla. You accept difference. But when someone steals, lies, cheats, or deceives, we don't say, "That's your truth." We say, "That's wrong," and we mean it. Now think about how often people reference fairness, fairness at work, fairness in relationships, fairness in justice systems. The cry for fairness isn't based on legal knowledge, it's intuitive. When workers demand better treatment, when children complain about being punished unfairly, when friends say, "You always interrupt me," they are not inventing new rules. They're appealing to something they already believe exists. They're saying, this isn't how people should treat each other. This moral expectation runs across all levels of society. The prisoner and the judge both believe in fairness. The liar still hates being lied to. The unfaithful partner still demands loyalty. It's not consistency, but it's revealing. Even those who violate the moral law expect others to keep it. Why? Because the law exists independently of how well we follow it. Let's make it even more personal. Have you ever caught yourself saying something in an argument that was meant to prove you're the more moral one? "I would never do that to you. After all I've done for you. You're being selfish." These are not logical rebuttals. They're moral charges. And they only work because you and the other person are referencing a shared understanding of right and wrong. You might think, well, people just use those lines to manipulate, and that's true, some do. But even the manipulator proves the point. If there were no assumed moral code, manipulation wouldn't work. The very fact that we can weaponize morality shows how deep its roots go. This shared understanding of morality doesn't mean everyone agrees on every detail. But the framework is remarkably stable. People disagree on what punishment is fair, but not on the idea that wrong should be punished. People differ on how truth should be spoken, but not on the value of truth itself. We see this even in international human rights discussions. Cultures may have different traditions, but when faced with crimes against humanity, most nations agree there is a line that should not be crossed. They don't say it's their custom. They say, "This is wrong." That agreement doesn't come from treaties alone. It comes from something older, something within us that insists there is such a thing as justice. So what does all this tell us? That moral disagreements are not just battles of ego or power. They are often attempts, imperfect but real, to appeal to a law that both sides recognize, even if they interpret it differently. Every argument about right and wrong is in its own way a confession that morality is real, that we didn't invent it, that we are accountable to it, even when it makes us uncomfortable. And that brings us to something even more mysterious. If we feel compelled to argue from morality, then where does that compulsion come from? Is it instinct, or is it something even higher, something that commands rather than merely suggests? We all know what instinct feels like. When a child is in danger, a parent might run toward the fire without thinking. That's instinct. When food is scarce, people naturally look out for their own needs first. Again, instinct. It operates automatically, but morality doesn't always follow that pattern. In fact, it often pushes against instinct. Imagine standing at a riverbank, watching someone drown. Your body is telling you to stay safe. Self-preservation kicks in, yet something else rises up, telling you to jump in, to risk your life for another. That voice isn't instinct. It's something that commands you, often in opposition to what you feel. That's the first major difference. Instinct urges, but morality commands. Take another example, honesty. Imagine you're faced with a situation where lying would protect you, save your reputation, maybe even save your job. Every instinct says lie, just this once. But there's another voice, quiet yet stubborn, saying, tell the truth. And when you lie anyway, that voice doesn't go away, it haunts you. That is not how instincts behave. Instincts fade once the threat passes. Moral conscience lingers. There are times we want to do good, but not because it benefits us. We might give anonymously, help someone with no chance of reward, or admit fault when no one would know otherwise. These moments don't benefit survival. They cost us something, and yet we still feel they are the right thing to do. Why? If morality were simply instinct, we would only follow it when it benefits us. But we don't. Sometimes we follow it even when it hurts. There's also the issue of moral conflict. Instincts don't argue, they react. But when you face a moral dilemma, you experience an inner tension, as if two opposing laws are at war inside you. One says, protect yourself. The other says, do what is just. One says, stay quiet. The other says, speak up. If these were just clashing instincts, you'd follow whichever was stronger, but you don't always do that. Sometimes you go against the stronger instinct, because you believe the weaker voice is more right. That's the difference between choosing based on preference and choosing based on obligation. Moral decisions often feel like burdens. You don't want to forgive, but you know you should. You don't feel like being fair, but something inside you says, this is the right way. That sense of ought is not instinctual. It is a response to something greater than your personal advantage. Let's test this idea in real life. Think of a time you sacrificed for someone else, not because it felt good, but because it felt necessary. You gave money you couldn't afford. You stood up for someone when you were afraid. You apologized even when your pride resisted. In those moments you weren't acting from instinct. You were obeying a law you couldn't touch or see, but that you knew was real. Now consider guilt. Why does it stay with us even when there are no consequences? If you betray a friend and no one finds out, you still feel guilty. Instinct doesn't explain that. If morality were just a social tool, useful for group survival, then guilt wouldn't matter in secret. But it does. We carry it. We try to escape it, but it follows us. That's not instinctual behavior. It's moral accountability. It's true that some moral impulses align with survival. Helping others can build trust. Truth can build reputation, but these benefits are side effects, not the source. We follow morality even when it costs us socially. People die protecting others. People lose jobs over integrity. People suffer for justice. That's not instinct, that's law, and it behaves like a law, not like a suggestion. You don't say, I prefer not to steal. You say, I shouldn't steal. The difference is critical. Prefer is about taste. Should is about duty, and when duty speaks, we hear it as a command, not an idea we came up with. So if morality is not just instinct, and if it rises above our biological impulses, then we have to ask, what kind of thing is it? What sort of reality gives us laws we feel bound to obey, even when we don't benefit from them? The existence of this moral law, this voice that commands and corrects, is the next step in our exploration. It opens the door to something beyond our instincts, beyond our biology, even beyond ourselves. We've seen that morality doesn't behave like instinct. It commands us, it judges us, it compels us, even when it goes against our own desires or interests. That points to something more enduring and objective. And now we come to an even more sobering idea, that morality is not something we created, but something we discovered. It behaves not like a tool shaped and sharpened by human hands, but like a natural law already existing, waiting to be recognized. Nobody invented the law of gravity. We didn't decide that objects would fall to the ground when dropped. We simply observed it and gave it a name. In the same way, no society truly creates morality from nothing. Cultures may shape their legal systems and customs, but they do not determine that cruelty is evil or that love is good. They recognize it, like sailors recognizing the stars to navigate, not to invent, but to follow. When a mathematician says 2 + 2 = 4, they are not expressing a personal opinion. They're describing something that is true, independent of their feelings about it. In the same way, when we say murder is wrong, we are not just expressing emotion. We are recognizing a moral truth that does not depend on our approval. It just is. We may try to explain morality away as a social contract or a product of evolution. And yes, society plays a role in how morality is taught, but even societies that twist or suppress moral truth can't erase it. A tyrant may legalize oppression, but he cannot make it right. The people under him still know it's wrong. They may be afraid to speak, but fear does not silence conscience. Think about the moments in history when people stood up against injustice, against slavery, genocide, discrimination, exploitation. Often, the laws of the land permitted the evil. Often, the society accepted it, but certain individuals said no, not because it was popular, not because it was easy, but because it was right. That kind of resistance doesn't come from cultural programming. It comes from moral clarity, from recognizing a truth that exists whether the world acknowledges it or not. Children instinctively know when they are treated unfairly. No one teaches them the definition of justice. They just know when they've been wronged. Likewise, they know when they've done something wrong, even before they learn the rules. They hide when they lie. They avoid eye contact after they steal. That reaction isn't taught, it's intuitive. It's recognition, not invention. Consider also how people react when confronted with truth. Deep down we crave it. We want to be on the side of justice, even if we fail to live up to it. That's why movies about sacrifice and courage move us. Why apologies feel like relief. Why honesty, even when painful, earns respect. These aren't instincts. They're responses to a standard that already exists. We respond to it the way our eyes respond to light. Not because we created it, but because we were built to recognize it. Now consider the opposite. If morality were invented like a tool, it would change constantly depending on usefulness. It would bend with convenience. It would have no power to accuse us, but moral truth doesn't behave like that. It resists manipulation. It convicts the guilty even when no one is watching. It defends the weak even when they have no voice. It holds its ground, even when ignored. If morality were just a human creation, then no action could be objectively wrong, only unpopular, but that's not how we live. When we say torturing children is evil, we don't mean we dislike it. We mean it is wrong. No explanation, no culture, no situation can make it right. That confidence in moral truth only makes sense if morality is not ours to change. Think of explorers finding new land. They didn't create the mountains or rivers. They merely found what was already there. In the same way, when we discover kindness, justice, integrity, and mercy, we are not creating those values. We are finding what was already written into the human story. Morality is not an invention, it is a discovery. Even the word conscience reflects this idea. It comes from Latin, conscientia, which means with knowledge. Conscience is not a random feeling, it is knowledge. Deep inner awareness of a law that is not made by man, yet felt by every man. A law that cannot be rewritten by opinion polls or silenced by denial. That brings us to a crucial point. If moral law exists outside of us, then we are not its author. We are its audience. We are not the creators. We are the responders. That changes everything, because it means there is something, or someone, greater than us, who put this law in place and calls us to live by it. Once we accept that morality is not something we created, but something we discovered, like gravity or mathematics, it brings us face with a much deeper issue. If the moral law exists outside of us, and we are accountable to it, why do we struggle so terribly to obey it? Why is it that even when we agree with the law, we break it? We admire honesty. We expect it from others. We even teach it to our children. But we lie, not always to harm, but often to protect ourselves, to avoid embarrassment, to control perception, to gain some advantage. And afterward, when the noise settles, there is that uneasy feeling in the chest, a silent verdict. We know we've done wrong, and the worst part, we already knew it before we did it. It's not ignorance that leads us to moral failure. It's weakness, or maybe more accurately, it's rebellion. There is a part of us that wants to be good, and another part that fiercely resists it. It's not a misunderstanding of the rules. It's the refusal to surrender self-interest when it collides with moral duty. Consider the gap between our standards for others and our standards for ourselves. We demand loyalty, but excuse our own betrayals. We expect respect, but speak harshly. We want forgiveness, but struggle to offer it. The moral law is not flexible, but we are. We bend ourselves around it, trying to avoid its weight. We justify, we rationalize, we delay, but the standard doesn't move. This struggle isn't theoretical, it's painfully personal. Think of the last time you promised to be better. Perhaps you told yourself you'd be patient, you'd stay calm, you'd be honest, but in a moment of pressure or frustration, the old habits returned. The sharp words came out. The shortcut was taken, and again you felt the sting of failure. That feeling wasn't because you violated a social rule. It was because you violated yourself. You fell short of who you knew you were supposed to be. We are not animals obeying simple instinct. We are not machines running on code. We are beings who make moral decisions, and often make them badly. Even when we want to be good, we fall short. And when we don't want to be good, we find ourselves fighting against something that insists we should be. This battle within us is constant. It would be easier if the moral law only existed outside us, written on stone tablets or courtrooms, but it's worse. It's written within. It speaks in our quiet moments. It accuses in solitude. It doesn't care about our excuses. It demands integrity when no one is watching, and that is why it's so difficult to escape. This is where the human dilemma begins to show its full shape. On one hand, we recognize the moral law as good. On the other hand, we constantly violate it. We fail not once, but repeatedly, and yet we cannot seem to accept failure as normal. We feel the guilt. We carry the weight. We promise to change. Why? because we know we were meant for something better. There is no peace in pretending the standard doesn't exist, and yet there is also no peace in realizing it does, because then we must face our inability to live by it. We are caught, not because the law is cruel, but because we are conflicted. We want to be our own masters, and the moral law keeps calling us to humility. It demands something deeper than behavior. It demands a change in the heart. This internal struggle reveals that morality is not just about outward action. It's about motive, about truth, about love. You can do the right thing for the wrong reason and still feel empty. You can give generously but do it for applause. You can apologize but not mean it. The law is not fooled. It exposes not only what we do, but why we do it. So where does this leave us? We live with a law we did not make, a law we know is good, a law we feel obligated to follow. And yet, a law we cannot perfectly obey. That is the human condition, a split within the self, a recognition of the good and a failure to grasp it. This should humble us. It should stop us from self-righteousness. Because no matter how moral we appear to others, we know the truth within. We know how far we fall from the standard we defend, and yet, strangely, we still believe the standard is right. This persistence of moral law, despite our inability to fully live it, points us once again to a deeper mystery. If the law judges us, but we still believe in it, even love it, then perhaps we are not just accidental beings with guilty feelings. Perhaps we were made with a purpose. Perhaps this law isn't here to crush us, but to call us towards something greater than ourselves. We are caught between two realities. On one side, a moral law that demands truth, courage, humility, and love. On the other, a self that falls short, not occasionally but continually. This tension is not theoretical. It's the quiet battle behind our decisions, our relationships, our regrets. And yet, for all our failures, we don't dismiss the law. We still believe it matters. That itself is astonishing. If morality were simply a social invention, we would modify it when it becomes inconvenient. But we don't. We may ignore it, we may break it, but we don't stop believing in it. Even the most cynical person expects to be treated fairly. Even the most corrupt leader cries foul when betrayed. We remain under the authority of a law that we neither control nor escape. And that points us to something bigger than ourselves. Every law presupposes a lawgiver. Laws do not write themselves. They are not abstract forces like gravity or electricity. They are purposeful. They are prescriptive. They say not what is, but what ought to be. That is a crucial distinction. Gravity describes behavior. Morality commands it. It says you should tell the truth. You ought to help the weak. You must not exploit the vulnerable. These are not observations, they are obligations, and obligations require an authority. Who or what has the authority to place such universal demands on the human heart? Not governments. They change, not cultures. They contradict one another. Not evolution. It explains survival, not sacrifice. None of these can account for a moral law that is binding regardless of circumstance. Yet that's what we experience. A law that accuses us in silence, that praises us when we do what is right, though no one sees it. A law that cannot be bribed, fooled, or silenced. This moral law is too consistent to be a personal invention. We don't get to choose it like a playlist or a diet. It doesn't adjust itself to suit our personality or comfort. In fact, it often demands what we most resist: humility instead of pride, forgiveness instead of revenge, truth instead of image. If we created it, we would have made it easier, but it resists our convenience. That resistance is evidence of its independence, and yet the law is not cold. It doesn't only condemn, it inspires. It draws us toward the best version of ourselves. Think of the stories we admire, the people who gave up comfort for justice, who risked safety for truth, who loved their enemies. These are not just admirable actions. They awaken something deep in us, a longing, a sense that we were made not just to survive, but to be noble. Where does that come from? This longing cannot be fully explained by biology or social conditioning. A mother sacrificing her life for her child defies survival logic. A whistleblower exposing corruption while losing everything gains no evolutionary advantage, yet we call these people good. We feel they have touched something higher, something sacred. That sense doesn't come from nowhere. It reflects the reality of the law and the presence of a lawgiver. If this law has a source, it must be personal. Impersonal forces do not create moral obligations. They have no intention, no justice, no goodness. Gravity does not care if you fall. Fire does not care if you burn, but the moral law cares. It distinguishes between cruelty and compassion. It exalts selflessness and convicts selfishness. That kind of moral weight implies more than a force. It implies a mind, a will, a being, not just any being. A being outside of human culture, above political systems, beyond time. One who defines good not by consensus, but by nature. One who placed this law within us, not for punishment alone, but for guidance. The lawgiver must be moral, or the law would be arbitrary. And if the law is just, the lawgiver must be just. If the law calls for mercy, then the source must know compassion. And this brings us to the most human of questions. If the moral law reflects the character of its giver, what does that say about the kind of world we live in? It means justice is not an illusion. It means love is not weakness. It means conscience is not a glitch. It means our failures are not meaningless. They are reminders that we are not yet what we were meant to be. It also means our longing to be better is not foolish. It is foundational. It means that even in our worst moments, the law still calls us, not to shame us, but to restore us. If there is a moral lawgiver, then morality is not just about rules. It is about relationship between the human heart and the one who shaped it, between the broken life and the one who still believes it can be made whole.